Jose Abreu was like getting drafted around, pick 300 or whatever. He was still under contract with the Astros, but then he was quickly just washed up and out of the league. I want to ask you, last year you came on the show and I was asking you about basically trying to look for that year's Jose Abreu, because back in 2024, if people can remember that far back, Jose Abreu was like getting drafted around, pick 300 or whatever. He was still under contract with the Astros, but then he was quickly just washed up and out of the league. So we're trying to figure out which guys might be trapped and just might be washed pretty early after opening day. And we discussed George Springer as a potential candidate, was coming off a down year. You very correctly identified on last year's pod that George Springer was someone that still had good seasons left in the tank and was not someone we should avoid for fear of potentially kind of falling off a cliff. And obviously George Springer was on a lot of league winning rosters last year. So I kind of wanted to go back or go down that road again and look at some of these old hitters and see if we see maybe a potential this year's George Springer, while also kind of looking for potential guys that could really fall off a cliff. So I wanted to start with just like a group of guys, and we're not going to go through more than one or two of these guys maybe, but just wanted to read some of the old guys who are coming off of good years. So we've got like Freddie Freeman, Salvador Perez, George Springer, Christian Yelich, Jose Altuve, Teoscar Hernandez, Trevor Story, Eugenio Suarez, Jurickson Profar, Xander Bogaerts, Jorge Polanco, Max Muncy, and Giancarlo Stanton. They're all fairly old, 31, 32 at the youngest. It's such a young man's game right now, Steve. Like, it's really hard to find that many guys who are kind of in their mid 30s and are getting drafted high. But did any of those just older hitters who are coming off of good years stand out as being risks to sort of fall off, just due to sort of where they're at on the aging curve and the fact that they're still getting drafted fairly high based on how they performed in 2025?
Yeah, it was tough. This was a tough assignment because like most of them, like I think the market is smart and like have been discounted a little bit, and most of them are still pretty good values, like at least by my numbers. But when I was looking through it, like the two that kind of stood out are Polanco and Story, just because if you look at what they did last year and compare it to like their previous few years, like they made significant gains, both in like strikeout rate and EV, I think in both cases. And you just expect some like natural regression there to begin with, right? And then you add in like the age and injury risk. Like I went back a couple years to try to compare 25 to like what they had, the baseline they had established, and I had to go like 2 or 3 years to get enough like plate appearances, right? Because they missed a lot of time before last year. But I think a lot of it is like priced in, still like decent values. I think Story's the one that like worries me a little bit more. Like his defense was really bad last year, and it's hard to imagine him like actually losing playing time. But if he's projected for like a 300 OBP and he's making a lot of errors, like is there like a finite leash, I guess? Because I know that like defense was really bad like down the stretch. Maybe that's just random, but it was in like the Boston Press, a lot of errors. I think in September, like 7 of his 19 happened in September, like multiple games with like a couple throwing errors, and probably nothing. But if you're really trying to like pick nits and identify like risks, I'd say there's some there with him at least.
Yeah, and they do kind of have just sort of some guys hanging around. Like they brought in Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. Obviously, I think Marcelo Mayer fits better at third base if Story can just kind of do what he did last year. But Mayer probably a better defensive shortstop than Story, and Kiner-Falefa obviously a better defensive shortstop than Story. So like they have some options, even if they're uninspiring options, if they did want to go in a different direction there. I haven't ended up with any Jorge Polanco, but I definitely should have when he was still a free agent. I think he was a really good value back then. I am wary about paying for just that year came out of nowhere really. and now he's on a big deal. This is maybe a more interesting group though, Steve. So this is where we're talking about old hitters who are probably in everyday roles. One of these guys is going to probably be in a platoon, but I want to see if you think any of these guys could really kind of continue a decline that they showed last year and have that sort of Jose Abreu risk, and then maybe see if any of these guys, because this is the group that Springer would have been in last year. He had a below league average year in 2024, and see if any of these guys might actually have that type of resurgence. So old guys coming off down years: Christian Walker of the Astros, Adolis Garcia, newly with the Phillies, JT Realmuto, Marcus Semien, another new Met, and then Cedric Mullins with Tampa Bay, Marcelo Zuna, a new Pirate, and Jorge Soler with the Angels. So let's start with like who you think is like a major risk to just continue the decline they showed last year.
I'd probably say like Soler for sure, and then probably Ozuna, but I didn't actually like look into him as much. I haven't, because I have no interest in him just in general. But Soler is the kind of player that like normally I'd be in on, at least for DCs, where it's like bad team, big contract, like the playing time like should be solid, but his skills like decayed pretty badly last year. And if he's not hitting, like it's not too hard to imagine the Angels just like using Trout more DH to try to keep him healthy and just sitting Soler or eating the contract because it is like the last year. So he's one that's like that could be nothing, I think, by midseason. And then Ozuna, I don't know, like I just don't have too much interest, but that probably like has a higher baseline, I think, and then probably a longer leash, but I wouldn't expect a huge bounce back, at least.
Yeah. I wonder if Ozuna, I assume his ADP will go up now that he's signed. But we'll put a pin in that Soler discussion. I might bring him up later. But what about any of these guys stand out as a potential like bounce back up? Obviously, I don't think we're expecting any of these guys to have a year like George Springer did last year, but I know the projections still like a few of these guys quite a bit. So do you have one or two of these that you're intrigued by as a potential bounce back candidate?
Yeah, I think the easy choice is Semien. Like I think it's been pretty like well noted that like he had a bad start after May, pretty much the same guy he has been in terms of skills, and just a lot of like playing time upside. Like the projections are really like harsh on him. I'm sure it's the age and partly like the last year that he missed. I forget how many played appearances he was. I still think still over 500, but like the previous 6 full seasons, he had over 700 plate appearances, right? And he's now projected for 600. So I think like, good team, probably hitting high in it, has a history of playing every single day. So I think there's playing time upside as well as like a little bit of skills upside just based on like, what the projections are expecting. And then the other one I didn't expect to like, I don't know, be interested in, and I'm glad you asked this because now maybe I will be a little bit more, is Garcia. Playing time not nearly as secure, but the skills really aren't that different like last year compared to what he was doing before. Projections still like it. Strikeouts were a little bit better, I think, than they had been. Barrel rate, sprint speed's not great, but it hasn't been for a few years. So I think it's pretty easy to see him being like a value, at least, not on Springer levels, but, compared to where he's going.
Yeah, definitely. I felt the same way about Garcia when like I've never really been in on Garcia, which was a big mistake from 2021 through 2024, I guess maybe. But he at least had a batting average above 240 from 2021 through 2023, while hitting for a bunch of power and some speed. And then obviously just tailing off a little bit from that career year in 2023, but the projections really, I was surprised by how much they like Garcia with the Phillies. Like ATC has him for 234 with 23 homers and 11 steals, but like Oopsie has him for 241 with 25 homers and 14 steals. Like if you can get 241 with 25 homers, 14 steals at pick 230 is where Garcia's going. So I mean, you could be drafting Garcia as like your OF4 or OF, maybe even OF5, but probably more like OF4 for me.